Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this Immigration New Zealand update. It's hard to believe that a government presentation would prove so popular on a Friday afternoon, but here you all are. You might have noticed there's a few cameras in the room. The reason for that is this is being live streamed over across the net. So you may or may not be recorded, just awarding from your perspectives. So we've got roughly 1,200 people listening from all different parts of the country over the net. So this is the first time we've done that, so let's hope it works out. So hi to you all out there. Just quickly, a couple of housekeeping aspects. If you're looking to use the ladies and the gents, right across the past the reception, past the cafe and directly on your left. If we have to evacuate, just out the doors you came, and we sort of meet round on Lambton Quay. If that exit's not available, we'll lead you out a back exit. And if you've got anything that goes beep, if you can just turn it on to silent, would be greatly appreciative. Now, normally, for those of you who have been to our seminars before, normally we would share with you a range of products and services, from how to attract migrants to how to settle and retain migrants, and again, bits around policy. So I'll introduce just a few of my colleagues, just so you know they're in the room, but we are going to focus today's events on policy only, given that there has been some significant changes to those policies. We're going to spend most of our time on the changes to essential skills and the skilled migrant category policy. And we're also going to just touch on a couple of other policies, two of which already are in play, and the third which kicks off as of Monday coming. And then we hope to get through this all in a reasonable time where we can open the floor up for some questions and answers. And remember, we've got our cyber audience that may have some questions and answers to go along with us. The three presenters will be, and this is quite a unique thing we're doing today too, is that we've involved the people, Shane Kinley, who I'll introduce shortly. Well, he'll introduce himself actually. Shane has been totally ingrained through these policy changes and has been at the heart of where we've got to. And Kathy Tate, who's responsible for taking the policy and then making that practical to the employers and the migrants. So she'll be able to explain how it will work for you. So the important thing to remember with these changes is they will come into effect. So essential skills and skilled migrant category come into effect this Monday, the 28th of August. So any lodgements of applicants that are happening before the 28th of August on Monday will be dealt with under the old policy. Okay. Here we go. So what we thought we'd just start off, just before we get right into this, is just to make sure everybody is clear on what these policies are. So essential skills is a temporary work visa. So the purpose of the visa is about filling temporary gaps within the New Zealanders are not available. So temporary gaps within the New Zealand labour market where a New Zealander is not available. Skilled migrant category is more around enhancing New Zealand's labour force by allowing skilled people to come in here and settle and gain residence. So the key is essential skills is temporary visas, skilled migrant more long-term residence visas. So that sets the scene. I'm going to introduce Shane Kennedy and Kathy Tate to come up, introduce themselves. They're going to take you through, they're going to try and share with you how we reached, why we've come to these policies, what those changes are and how they're going to impact on you as employers and the migrants that you employ. Shane and Kathy.
Thank you, Dean. My name's Shane Kinley. I'm a Policy Director at MBIE. So I've been responsible, as Dean says, for leading a lot of the policy consultation, particularly for the Essential Skills Review. I was also involved in the skilled migrant category changes, and some of the other policy thinking that's been going on. And we'll continue to be involved as we take the essential skills policy work. There are some follow-up actions as we take that forward over the next 18 months. I'm lucky enough, you won't be able to see her on camera, to have my colleague Elizabeth Gerard in the room, who has been, I guess, the delivery person behind this policy work. And she's also here if we need to answer some questions later on. So, Kathy.
Hi, so my name's Kathy Tate. I'm in the Immigration Operational Policy team. So my team is responsible for taking all those sort of high-level government decisions and actually turning them into firstly the immigration instructions, which are the rules that immigration officers use when they're deciding visa applications, but also all of the stuff that goes around it, such as the forms, the website material, There's lots of sort of collateral that goes around supporting that and supporting the rollout to our staff as well. So our team has been working extremely hard on these changes, and it'll be a great opportunity to talk to you about them today. But Shane's going to set up the background first.
Thank you, Kathy. The context of what I'd like to cover today is a little bit about the government's rationale and objectives. So there are some faces that I recognise in this room that we saw through the consultation process. So I'd like to acknowledge and respond to some of the issues that were raised during consultation. So and talk through some of the thinking and the advice that we gave to the government, and then come to the decisions that the government's made. So Kathy will then pick up. So starting at the start of our policy process, and we've been looking at essential skills and skilled migrant for around about the last 2 years. So, and thinking about the composition of the migrant workforce that were coming to New Zealand and are in New Zealand. So we'd noticed that there'd been a significant increase in the number of temporary migrants. So. And there was some evidence that this was occurring in industries that are lower skilled, with lower wages and lower productivity. So, in light of this trend, the government wanted us to make some adjustments to these policies, both essential skills and skilled migrant, so to reinforce the government's long-term labour market objectives. One of the other factors was that the current settings had resulted in a pool of long-term, low-skilled temporary migrants who had been in New Zealand for a long period of time. We had some evidence of people who had been here for 17 or 18 years, so on 1-year essential skills visas, and they did not have the rights associated or a pathway to residence. So they were vulnerable to a situation where at the end of any 1 year, they could be required to leave New Zealand. In response to that issue around the pool of temporary migrants, the government made the decision to introduce the South Island contribution visa policy, a residence visa policy, which Dean is going to talk to you about later. That policy will provide residence for around 1,600 people in the South Island, and their families. And that policy has opened on the 22nd of May this year, and we've already seen significant numbers of people applying for residence under that. Further changes were needed, though, to support the government's recent changes to the skilled migrant category in the essential skills area. And the objective behind these was to ensure that workers with the potential to gain residence were who could become well settled in New Zealand. To ensure that there was a balance between those workers and providing access to temporary labour for employers. So the government's policy objectives. In light of the trends that I've talked about, the government was wanting to see adjustments that met the labour market objectives that are on the screen. So we were looking to find a balance between ensuring that only workers with the potential to transition to residence and were becoming well settled in New Zealand, while, as I've said, also providing for access to temporary migrant labour necessary for New Zealand's continued economic growth. The policy response, which we consulted on through April and May this year, was to introduce remuneration bands that will determine skill levels. And this goes with the old skill level process for essential skills, which was based solely on ANSCO. The Australia New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations.
Correct.
So we've introduced remuneration thresholds, and we consulted on the appropriate remuneration thresholds. There were some changes made as a result of that consultation process and the decisions that the government finally decided to implement. We've also made a number of changes to the visa conditions, so for particularly the workers in the lower skilled roles. And Cathy is going to talk through a bit more of the detail of the changes and how those are being operationalised in a minute. I just wanted to conclude on the consultation process. And to just recognise what it was that we heard through that consultation process and some of the responses. If you're interested in more information about that, we do release all of our papers online. So the government cabinet decision-making paper, which has an extensive annex of the submissions and the responses, is available on the MB website at the OIA Official Information Act responses page. Some of the themes that we heard. First, there was concern that the mid-skilled essential skills remuneration threshold was set too high. And the government responded to that. So we'd consulted on a proposal to set that threshold at the median wage. So the final decision was to reduce that to the 85th percentile. The consequence of that was to move a number of essential skills migrants from the lower skilled into the mid-skilled band with the more generous visa conditions that are available there. We also heard that the inability to bring family to New Zealand would make New Zealand less attractive to lower skilled migrants. We heard that the 3-year maximum duration and the 12-month stand-down period would lead to higher staff turnover, increased recruitment costs and lower productivity. Some employers, in talking about this, suggested that 3 years was not a long enough time period to upskill people, to enable them to move from a lower skilled role through to a mid-skilled or a higher skilled role. There were some sector-specific issues that were raised as well. For example, in the primary sector, there was concern about the way that accommodation is treated and other allowances and how those are treated in the remuneration calculation. And when we looked at the instructions, which Cathy's going to talk about now, shortly, we made some changes and we took on board that feedback to reflect that so that the packages and the approaches that were common can still continue and that can be taken into account in their calculation for remuneration. Finally, the consultation was valuable in identifying some issues which we're prioritising in what we're calling the Phase 2 work programme for the temporary work visa settings review. These issues are largely in relation to sector-specific issues, but also some regional-specific issues, and looking at the seasonal visa. And I'll come back to that after Cathy's talked us through the detail of implementing the essential skills changes. Cathy, over to you.
Great, thanks. Right, so as Shane alluded to, there's different impacts for different people depending on what skill band they're going to be in. So the whole kind of concept of skill bands, especially including a combination of both ANSCO and remuneration, is the main thing that's new here. So if you can see, the biggest impacts are for those who are now going to be in lower skilled employment, particularly the fact that they'll have a 3-year maximum duration for their visa, so they can get 12 months at a time for each visa, but then up to a maximum of 3 years. So after 3 years, they can apply for a different visa. They could apply for an essential skills visa to do skilled work, but if they intend to apply for a essential skills visa for a lower skilled job, they won't be able to, it won't be granted. In order to kind of reset that, they'll need to spend 12 months offshore. And so that kind of resets them back to zero and they can come back for 3 years. The other big consequence for them is obviously the inability to bring family. So they can't support visas for their partners and children, and so that's quite a big change. Mid and higher skilled, the settings aren't too much different from now. Mid-skilled, they can have up to 3 years at a time on a visa, and higher skilled up to 5 years. And there's no maximum, they can gain subsequent essential skills visas after that time is up. Although we would be expecting people to move through to skilled migrant category rather than just keep rolling these over. So there are some transitional provisions for people who are already here. Firstly, with regards to that 3-year maximum, any visas granted or applied for, in fact, before Monday don't count towards that 3-year maximum. Won't have the skill, but won't be kind of classed as lower skill banded because that particular definition of lower skilled wasn't in place at the time they applied. So the 3 years will start counting from their next visa application. For family members who are already here, so as long as people's family have a visa based on their relationship with the essential skills visa holder, they can remain in New Zealand for the same duration as that person. So family members already here are able to stay along with the essential skills visa holder. So if the essential skills visa holder isn't applying for their next essential skills until, say, February next year, and they are assessed in February as being lower skilled, then they'll have 3 years from February next year, and their family will be able to remain with them throughout that time. So that's how that works for families already here. So this slide shows how those skill bands are actually calculated. So this is probably what you're going to be most interested in. It's important to note that immigration will be using hourly rates to calculate the skill bands. So I've given you the salaries there, but those are based on a 40-hour-a-week basis. So if somebody was to work for more than 40 hours a week, then obviously you'd need a higher salary to get the hourly rate to the same level. So looking at this, you can see we still use ANZSCO. For those at less than 1997 per hour, they're always basically going to be low skilled. For those above 35.25 an hour, always high skilled. And for those in between, that's in between those ranges, that's when the ANZSCO becomes significant to consider whether they're mid or low. So interestingly, for the ANZSCO 4 and 5s, there's no mid-skilled. For ANZSCO 4 and 5 jobs, they're either low or high based on the salary. We'll talk a little bit more about the impacts of that later. It's important to note there's no changes to the labour market test. The labour market test is the part of essential skills that requires employers to make genuine attempts to find New Zealanders. It's really at the sort of core of the policy. It's probably its most important feature, and that hasn't changed at all. So it continues exactly as it was, as it's in effect today. For ANZSCO 4 and 5 roles, that will mean going to talk to our work and income colleagues first to get a skills match report, but for everybody, unless the job is on a shortage list, it will involve advertising the role. And that includes even if there is somebody currently in the role. That is the settings today, and it continues to be the settings. It's very important to make it clear why New Zealanders were not suitable for the role. So you can find some more advice about that. As I said, it's current policy, but it's really important. So you can find some more advice about how, what kind of advertising is acceptable, all that kind of stuff on our website. So what does that mean? So what does it all mean for you guys? So firstly, we're not restricting the ability to access migrant labour. What it does mean is for lower skilled roles, you can't always keep the same person after 3 years. So still be able to support a migrant, but it might have to be a different person, or hopefully a New Zealander maybe. If somebody manages to move into a more skilled role, as I said, after 3 years, that's fine. They can apply for an essential skills visa for that more skilled role, and the 3-year maximum will not apply to them anymore. The 3-year maximum is on the people in the role. It's not on the person themselves. Another important thing is remuneration becomes quite important to our assessment, and this is where you can help out your immigration officer. You might not really feel like they need much help, but they do have a tough job, so we do appreciate if you can give them lots of information, especially about pay and hours. It becomes really important. If somebody is paid by salary, obviously the hours become really important to working out the hourly rate. So if you can be really kind of clear and upfront, that'll be really helpful about exactly what the pay and hours are. And we'll be requiring employment agreements, so hopefully those should have that, that should contain all of that detail. It's important to note that where somebody is mid or high skilled, remuneration will become a condition of the visa. So that means that a person can't be paid less than the salary band. So if somebody's in a mid-skilled employment for ANZCO 1, 2 or 3 job, they can't be paid less than $19.97 per hour while they hold that visa. So if their pay rate drops below what the band was, that can be considered a breach of their visa condition, which has consequences for both the person and potentially their employer as well. So it's an important thing to note. And future applications will be seeking evidence that that their pay has remained above that rate. So that can be pretty straightforward stuff like pay slips and so on. Cool. So I think I'm going to hand back to Shane, and I'll be back later.
Thank you, Kathy. Just picking up on, before we move off this slide, what this means for employers and the migrants that they employ. As we were going through the policy process, we did a lot of modelling, of the expected impacts and the breakdown of the existing essential skills visa holders. That became quite crucial as we were thinking about the appropriate remuneration threshold for the entry into mid-skilled. For an ANZCO level 4 or 5 worker, we think the situation is essentially the status quo. There's no change likely from the introduction of remuneration thresholds for those workers, apart from for a very small number of them who are able to meet that higher salary threshold. For the ANZCO skill level 1 to 3 workers, that's where the real changes are. And based on some sampling we did of the visas that have been approved over the last year, we think that slightly more than 50% of those visa holders would have continued to qualify for a mid or a higher skilled visa. And slightly less than 50% would have been newly classified as a lower skilled visa, with the more restrictive visa conditions, the requirement to apply annually, and the maximum duration. And the restriction on sponsoring their children and partners. What's next? These changes come into effect on Monday. So for all visas that are applied to from Monday, the new rules that we've just talked through will be the ones that apply. I've mentioned already that we have got further policy work to carry on with, and we will be working on phase 2 of the policy review over the next year. We will also be looking at the seasonal work visa, so for workers in seasonal occupations where the work clearly falls over only a part of the year, and whether or not we should look at a specific visa for those workers that is more closely tied to the period that they work. Over 2018, our plan at the moment is to continue policy work and to look at proposals to go back to the government with that will incentivise and reward good employer behaviour. And there are a range of proposals that we've identified in the Cabinet papers, which are available online, where we'll be looking, for example, at more use of accredited employers. And different conditions for accredited employers to be able to access migrant labour. There is one other small change, which is an annual thing. We've set the salary remuneration thresholds so that they will automatically index each year. So the rates that we've been telling you about today are the current rates. They're based on Statistics New Zealand's annual survey of workers and median wages. And those numbers change in November each year. So sometime around about November this year, there will be an increase that is likely in the thresholds. All right, that's the end of the presentation in relation to essential skills. I'll now move on to the skilled migrant category changes. So, the reason for this policy review. Skilled migrant category was introduced in 2003. Essentially, that category had not been substantially reviewed since it was introduced. It makes up a significant portion of the New Zealand Residents Program. And we were asked by the government when we looked at setting the Residents Program last year, to review the skilled migrant category. One of the reasons for this was that we were seeing more expressions of interest for the skilled migrant category than could be accommodated within the planning range that was allowed under the Residents Program. We were also seeing through our analysis of the people who were gaining residence through this category, that we were perhaps not prioritising the quality level in terms of the skill level, and the wage level of migrants who were gaining residence through skilled migrant. Between 2003 and 2013, we had seen, in a period where most New Zealanders were seeing income rises, skilled migrants were actually reducing their income over that period of time. So there'd been a 10% decrease in the incomes of skilled migrants. There were also a growing number of applications that were coming through for lower wage roles. Mainly in managerial and service occupations, supervisor roles, where ANZSCO was not always a good proxy for the skill. So the policy objectives for this review. The government had made some decisions, which were announced in October last year around the New Zealand Residents Program. That had set the total level of residence approvals over a 2-year period, and the proportion of residence places that are allocated to the different streams, between the skilled and business stream, family international, and humanitarian. The Residents Program planning range for the year from 1 July 2016 to 30 June 2018 had been set at 85,000 to 95,000 over those 2 years. It was a reduction of 5,000 over the Residents Program that we'd had in the previous 2-year period. When we looked at the number of skilled migrant category applications that were being approved, we saw that planning range was going to be exceeded if we continued on the trends, the number of applications that we were processing and approving at that stage. So ministers made a decision in October to immediately increase the points that were required to be selected for an EOI from 140 or below 140 with a job offer to 160 points. That change in October was all about managing the numbers, and ensuring that we stayed within the planning range. The policy review that we've undertaken following that, so we consulted late last year on that policy review, and the decisions were announced in April, are being implemented now, was about managing the quality within the pool of skilled migrants that were were drawn through the expression of interest process. So there is no expectation that there will be a change to the quantity at this stage. It's all about balancing who gets selected from within the numbers that get selected. Just to note, at the time that we made the changes to the skilled migrant category in October last year as well, there were a couple of other changes that were made. So the capped family categories were reduced in terms of the number of people who were eligible there. And the reason for that was that we had sufficient applications on hand at that time to be able to meet those for the period of the residence program. So actually, rather than being reduced, we closed, the parent category at that stage. So we also made some changes last year to clarify the proxies for meeting the English language requirements associated with skilled migrant applications. And as a consequence of the changes from October last year, we have seen that through the first year of the residence program, we have fallen within the planning range that the government has set for that. So, having talked about the policy objectives and some of the changes from last year, the policy response from the changes that are coming into effect on Monday for the skilled migrant category. Similar to essential skills, we have introduced the remuneration thresholds. So there is a slight difference between the remuneration threshold with the introduction of the 85% of the median for the mid-skill for essential skills. So Kathy's going to talk through this both for the skilled migrant category, but then also doing a comparison which puts the two categories alongside each other. The government also made some decisions that realigned the points system, and that was about putting more emphasis on the characteristics that are better associated with better outcomes for migrants. We've put more focus onto skilled work experience, more recognition of skill levels in the 30 to 39 age group, and with very high salary levels. We removed at the same time some of the points that were no longer aligned with government priorities. Kathy, I think I'll hand over to you now for the detail of this.
Yes, thank you. So I'll go through the points ins and outs in a little bit more detail a bit later on, but first, this is probably of most interest to you, which is how we define skilled employment for the purposes of SMC. So it's not, apart from the income thresholds, it's pretty similar to now. So we'll start at the top, that top row there. So ANZCO skill level 1, 2 and 3, they need to meet an income threshold of 2349, which is, as Shane said, that rate which is 100% of the median income rate. And that will be going up in November. So, and I've got the salary for the 40-hour week there again, but just keep in mind that's 40 hours. So. With SMC, it becomes the training and work experience of the person also get taken into account. So somebody can't be considered skilled, even if they're doing the job, they have to have the relevant qualifications or work experience required by ANZCO in order to be considered skilled. Depending on what the job is and what the skill level is, ANZCO will specify either a qualification or a qualification level, or allow a certain number of years of work experience to substitute for that. So, which is the same as now, but again, it's quite important, so worth remembering. One thing that's new is we have a way of recognising either ANZCO 405 occupations or occupations that just don't fit anywhere in ANZCO at all as skilled, which we previously didn't have. So if somebody is working in a job that is earning more than 35.24 per hour, and again that rate will change, we can recognise them as skilled, even if they're either in an ANZCO 405 or in a completely outside ANZCO job. So that's quite different. They will also have to be qualified or have relevant work experience. And so, there's some levels that we've set for those. So either the equivalent of a level 4 certificate, basically, or 3 years of work experience. So that's how that works. So I've got a whole bunch of slides with boring tables on them. I suggest that actually if you're interested in really digging into this level of detail, you go have a look at our website, because it's all there. But this is the points previously and the points now. So I'll just highlight a couple of things rather than go through this in a lot of boring detail. So this one is about skilled employment. The key thing here is removal of points for future growth area, and addition of points for people earning twice the median income. So some bonus points available there. In terms of skilled work experience, you can see that there's a few more points available for work experience. So at 2 years, it's the same, but when you're getting up towards 10 years, you can get significantly more points for work experience, and that's because we understand that work experience is more valuable to employers than qualifications, for example. One thing to note is that the way work experience will be assessed is a bit different. So work experience will usually have to be skilled as in an ANZCO skill level 1, 2 or 3 role. And the exception to that is if somebody is working on one of those either 4 or 5 roles or one of those outside ANZCO roles. So if their skilled job is in an ANZCO 1 or 2 or 3 role, their work experience will not need to be in the same role, but also in an ANZCO 1, 2 or 3 role. So future growth area, some other future growth area points for work experience removed, and a little bit of streamlining on the New Zealand work experience side. This one's about qualifications. So there's a few more points available for people with masters and PhDs. And yeah, as Shane mentioned, qualifications for absolute skill shortage have been removed, as well as there's future growth area points for qualification in identified future growth area. And finally, basically a few more points available for age for 30 to 39-year-olds. They get treated like 20 to 29-year-olds, which is good, and removing points for close family support in New Zealand, because just one of those things that it didn't really have any impact on outcomes. And sort of streamlining some of those partner points as well. So yeah, again, I suggest having a look at our website. You can see this table there, which compares it all. There's also a nifty kind of points indicator thing where people can enter in all of their different situations, and it will calculate the number of points they've got. So that's probably the easiest thing to do if you're really interested in diving into this level. So for SMC, expected impacts. So the salary thresholds will have some impact. As Shane said, there were quite a few people getting skilled migrant who were not earning very much. Those people will no longer be able to access skilled migrant until they get to the point a bit further through, after a few more years of work experience perhaps, where they are earning above that median income level. Obviously, employers can still support people on temporary visas in that time while they're getting that work experience. So the changes are most likely to impact former international students, as they were the primary ones, mostly filling those lower paid roles and coming through SMC. Right, so that's it for SMC. Now I'm just going to take you through a bit of like how they work together, how Essential Skills and SMC work together as a pathway now. So looking at ANZCO, people in ANZCO roles 1 to 3 to start with. So this is basically how they go through. You can see if they're earning less than that 85% of the median income level, which is currently $19.97 an hour, they're lower skilled for Essential Skills and they don't have access to SMC. So that's the big impact for them of the introduction of these policies. There is this kind of awkward period in between the more than the mid-skilled threshold for Essential Skills, but not quite at that threshold required for SMC. So at this point, people are considered mid-skilled for Essential Skills, which means they're able to bring their family. They're able to get 3 years of visa in one go. And they don't have that maximum duration imposed on them. However, they're not yet able to access skilled migrant category. One would hope that within the 3 years of their mid-skilled Essential Skills visa, they can lift enough to access SMC. But those people are well on their way. So, and then once they're above that threshold, yes, they can access skilled migrant category. So, so that's how that works for ANZCO skill level 1 to 3. It's a little bit different for people in roles that are ANZCO 4 or 5. So for 4 and 5s, it's actually really straightforward, at least. If they're earning less than that upper income threshold of 35.24, they're both lower skilled for Essential Skills and no access to SMC. And then once they get above that threshold, they're considered skilled for both, and skilled for SMC, skilled for Essential Skills. But there's no middle ground for them. So there's no, as I said before, there's no mid-skilled. They're either lower skilled or highly skilled. So it's just important to kind of understand that. All right, so I apologise in advance. The next slide is another busy one. And it's about calculating remuneration. So this is relevant for both Essential Skills and SMC, and it's just a little bit about how we'll do it. And again, heaps more information available on our website on this. So simplest scenario is it's paid by hourly rate. In that case, as I said, our income thresholds are expressed in an hourly rate, so we will just compare the hourly rate to the hourly rate for the threshold, and that's easy, that's done. If it's above, it's above. Somebody's paid for by salary, we'll basically do the division. So we'll look at how many hours and then divide it down to get the hourly rate. If there's a range of hours expressed, then we'll use the maximum number of hours. There might be employment arrangements with different kinds of rates, so like a standard rate and an overtime rate, or like a weekend rate or something like that. In those cases, both rates are going to have to be over the threshold in order to be considered to meet it. So just something to keep in mind. And probably the most complicated ones, and if you're in this situation, definitely go have a look at all the detail. But where there's complicated things like add-ons and deductions and so on. So in short, deductions get included as part of a total salary package when we're doing that dividing. Allowances do not, unless it's accommodation, in which case they do. All types of accommodation included get counted as part of the total salary package, so whether it's allowance, deduction, or just provided by the employer as part of the employment agreement. So those ones can be a bit tricky, and as Shane said, there was a lot of feedback from the primary sector about these kinds of employment agreements, so we've made sure to include allowance for that kind of thing. So as I said, a lot more information about this is available on our website. We've got a banner on the front page that you can, it's easiest just to go there and click on the link, and it'll take you to a set of FAQs. If you've had a look at them, that's great. We are actually constantly adding to them as well. Might get some questions today, which we can put up there as well. So just keep looking. Especially over the next week or so, we're expecting to, as people start thinking about it more and more, we'll keep adding and adding and adding. Our contact centre is sending us through questions all the time that we're putting on there. So yeah, so they're getting pretty long, but they're very detailed and have a lot of information there for you. Now I'm handing back to Dean, I believe.
Cool. All right, thanks, Kathy. So we're almost through the formal part of this, and I'm sure you've got some questions and answers. Some questions and maybe some answers. We're fortunate to have Shane and Kathy here too, as they're the most qualified to take you through those answers. What we'll just quickly go over, and I'll go over this very quickly if I can, just a couple of updates on other visas. South Island Contribution Visa, the non-compliant employer and the accredited employer. The first two are already in play, so this is just a reminder, and the third one takes effect as of Monday as well. So the South Island Contribution Work Visa, and I know there's a lot of people who are live streaming in from the South Island, and there's probably employers of the North Island who have people they employ in the South. Effectively, Shane talked about that pool of migrants who had just been here year after year after year and had really become quite a valuable part of the South Island economies, but had no rights. So the government felt a little bit bad about this, and they've introduced this one-off visa, and this gives that pool of people an opportunity to gain residence. So the rules of it is that you need to be working in the South Island for 5 years or more prior to the 22nd of May 2017. And if that's the case, you can apply for this visa as long as you meet the normal conditions that go with residence, health, character, etc. You can apply for a work to residence visa. You'll get granted a 30-month visa. You must stay again employed in the South Island. And then after 24 months, you can then apply for residence. And the conditions after that will be you must remain in the South Island employed. So we're trying to keep people in the South Island, but we're also trying to give them some rights, which they deserve. So that is a one-off visa, and the important date there is the applications need to be in by the 23rd of May 2018. After that date, that opportunity is gone. This is just if any of you get visits from the Labour Inspectorate, we thought we'd just share you some of the consequences there will be from an immigration perspective. So this is effectively where you get issued a breach notice. Generally breach notice, I've included a couple of examples there, incorrect wage or holiday time records, no employment contracts or insufficient contracts. If you get a breach, there'll be instant penalties. I'll just show you the penalties in the next slide, but that website, the government for its own reasons has a name and shame, so you can go onto that website, you can see who is in breach and what companies are in breach and what their breaches are. So you want to stay off that list if possible. So just if you're given an infringement notice, there's an automatic 6-month stand down, and if there's multiple breaches, it could be up to 12 months. If it goes into the further steps through the Employment Relations Authority or the courts, those breaches can go to 24 months. Basically what it means is you cannot use immigration for that stand down period. It's out. So those two we've just talked about are in play now. And this comes into effect as of Monday. This is for the accredited employers. I don't think there's too many accredited employers in the room here, but I know there's a lot streaming in. Effectively, one of the gripes, and there's not many gripes with accreditation actually, but one of the gripes was that they had to do their renewal every 2 years. That is about to change. So actually for application or renewal will change to 2 years. In fact, in some cases, it will stretch to 5 years. But you'll have to be an organisation that convinces us that you are very fiscally healthy, that you've got a very good track record of compliance, a good history with us. So we're probably thinking of organisations like DHBs, government agencies, maybe local authorities, those types of organisations, some of the big banks. So you can imagine those authorities we're going to be quite confident with, but it will be between 2 and 5 years. One other change will be that if you are an organisation that has subsidiaries, the subsidiaries will need to apply for accreditation in their own right. So how we will deem a subsidiary is that if you're all businesses are given a New Zealand business number, if your subsidiary has its own unique New Zealand business number, it will need to apply for accreditation in its own right. And the last, and another change actually is we get a lot of gripes about the paper-based system for applications and renewal. I see the heads nodding. We expect that to change. It will definitely be shifted to online by the end of the year and hopefully a lot sooner. Just one other thing, the new terms and conditions for accreditation will include the ability for immigration to revoke your accreditation and audit. And they can audit at any time they like. So effectively it's saying we're extending the length of time, but we are going to have the ability, it's not saying it will, it's just saying it's going to have that right. And just to finish off, around the becoming of the accredited employer. So this is generally what's in place now. It's all about sound fiscal position. It's all about good HR processes and workplace practices. One of the things they are going to introduce and look a lot harder at, which they haven't in the past, is diversity in the workplace. So there are some companies who just tend to hire from 1 or 2 countries. That's not what immigration wants, and we'll be looking at that quite carefully through the whole process. And also they'll be looking for clear evidence that you're looking to upskill New Zealanders, that you have a New Zealanders first recruitment strategy, and that really the culture within your organisation is about New Zealanders first. So that's it in a nutshell. We are through the formal part of the presentation. We're running just a few minutes behind. We'd sort of gone for 3, but we're about 3-ish. So are there any questions? Now, we are streaming, so we're going to have to do this. We're going to do it through the microphones?
No, I've just got one question which was asked by quite a few people. Thank you to John. When working out hourly rates, how is salary and commission taken into account?
Kathy.
Right, so I can answer that. So salary is, as I said, salary is taken into account by dividing down, looking at the number of hours the person will be working and dividing the salary down to achieve the hourly rate. Commission will not be considered because we can't take into account work or pay that is not guaranteed. So commission or bonuses or anything like that will not be taken into consideration at all. So that's excluded from the calculation.
Are there any questions from the floor? Gosh, we've done a good job, haven't we? Question over here.
Wait for the microphone, so.
I'm a little bit confused about these hourly rates and the total remuneration package for a 40-hour week. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you work that for somebody who works less than 40 hours a week?
Right, so...
Repeat.
What's that?
Repeat.
So that question, just in case it didn't get picked up by the microphone, was how do we work out the hourly rate for somebody who's on a salary but doesn't work 40 hours per week? So what we would do, so for somebody working 30 hours per week, for example, look at how many hours they're going to work in a year, so 30 times 52, which is more maths than I can do in my head right now. But, so take that and then use that to divide down to get to the hourly rate. So look at the total salary, divide by the
But Kathy, the minimum hours are 30?
Yeah, the minimum hours for essential skills and for SMC is still 30 hours. That's something that's an existing policy but hasn't changed, yeah.
There is and I know there's a few tourist companies streaming in. There is an adjustment in the SMC piece, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, that there is an activity-based remuneration. So if you're a paraglider and you do $200 a jump and your earnings are based on your jumps, that is factored in. So
that's kind of an exception to the normal rules. So that's a sort of special situation. Yeah, that's new.
Any other questions? Have we got any from
Dean?
Oh, sorry.
Down here.
Have we got any from?
Sorry, just going back to the beginning when you had the reasons for these changes and said that it was because of the large number of applications you're receiving, was there also a counterbalance of the employment of New Zealanders to counteract those reasons? Or was there just more jobs available to suck them up?
Yep. So thank you. So the question is the policy rationale, and when I talked about one of the trends, which was that we had an increase in number both of skilled migrant applications and essential skills, how was that thought about compared to New Zealanders being available? So, and yes, that has been a part of our consideration throughout the whole of the policy process. So all of the immigration categories, essential skills is premised on the New Zealanders first. So the South Island contribution, we looked at the employment rates in the South Island was one of the factors that was taken into account when that policy was introduced. For essential skills, we were concerned with the number of essential skills visas rising while there were still New Zealanders available. So it was a part of the consideration.
Right, I've got a question here from Sue Yuan, wanting to know when the first expression of interest selection will be taking place after the 28th of August, and I believe it is the 6th of September.
Yes, that is correct.
That's good.
You knew that one.
Might have had some magical people at the back that told me that. Have you got any more questions?
Yeah, some more down there.
Hi there, I'm Shakai from CCDHB. This might be a little bit out of scope, but in regards to the sector-specific policies that you're looking to introduce, I'm just wondering if those sorts of policies will be taking in specific requirements of those sectors, because a couple of things have been raised in this presentation that kind of causes a little bit of question marks for me, and that's around remuneration and obviously DHB accreditation of where we get our migrants from because of our requirements that we have to stick to. So, that's my question essentially.
So question was sector-specific arrangements, and will it be looking at the sector-specific employment practices? So, we have identified some sectors that had raised quite specific issues in relation to essential skills. I think that's the first port of call for what we'll be looking to for the sector-specific consultation. So we will be going out and I think we'll be clear about the criteria for looking at a sector. So we don't have DHBs on the list that was identified to ministers as an initial area to look at. So we do have health from a aged care perspective. So we're looking at the aged care sector, which was where some issues were raised. We weren't aware of health sector issues more generally. I'm very happy to talk to you offline after this has finished streaming about those issues.
Shane, do you just want to share the other sectors that are going to be looked at?
I hope I've got the right page now, Dean. So, I don't.
Do you want us to come back to that? Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question from another online question. Is with the accredited employer fee after the 28th of August, are the fees changing?
No, the fees aren't changing after the 28th of August. They will stay the same, but all immigration fees are subject to review from time to time, but they're not associated with this.
And I think that the fees are, given the value you gain from accreditation, the fees are marginal.
I've also got a common thread. A few people are asking about IELTS and the rate of IELTS being 6.5. Is there anything that you can share with people about IELTS for SMC?
That's not changing. That hasn't changed. SMC has always had the requirement that people speak that level of English of IELTS 6.5. It's roughly about school leaver, university entrance level of English, which is about where we would expect, skilled people in the workforce to be able to, that's about the level of literacy that we would be needing for somebody to be considered skilled. I don't think there's any plans to, well, Shane can tell you if there is any plans, but I don't think there's any plans to look at that.
There are no plans to look at the IELTS at this stage. So just picking up, Dean, off on your question for me about the sector-specific areas that we're looking at. So the ones that we've identified through the consultation process were in the primary industries, so a range of occupations in the primary industries, aged care, which I had mentioned earlier, tourism and hospitality sectors. So those are the ones that are our identified ones. We'll look at if people come to us with suggestions that there are other sectors, but we will have a threshold where we'd need to be, convinced that there was a material sector-specific issue. The other thing I'd note in terms of the fees, so is as Kathy and Dean have said, there are no changes to fees at this point in time. There is a regular fee and levy review process, and we have signalled through the Cabinet papers that we've released that will be reviewed over the 2017-18 financial years. So I would expect that there will be consultation on that at some stage later this year or early next year, with new fees and levies in place by the middle of next year. So.
Oh, we need a microphone, actually.
It's to pick
it's
up
for our
with it.
streaming audience. Yeah.
No, we can repeat.
Yeah. So for the accredited employer category, there were a fair amount of changes, but then also there's all the banning of salaries for SMC and essential skills, but there were no salary changes to the minimum salary for offers under accredited employer. So when can employers anticipate that may change?
There's,
if at all.
So the question was, there were no changes to the salary for accredited employers at this stage for the specific options that accredited employers have. So at this stage, that's correct. There are no changes. We will be looking again at those salary thresholds through 2018 as we look again at the accreditation process and how we incentivise employers to move into that and whether or not the salaries are set at the right level. As a comparison to the salaries that have been set for SMC and essential skills now, and thinking about the relativities there.
So for those of you who are wondering what that salary is for accredited employers, it's $55,000 currently.
Right, I've got another question from online. It's very busy. Can you clarify if family members for ANZCO 1 to 3 have to apply for their own visa?
Right, so yes, I can clarify that. So it depends if somebody's considered low-skilled or not. So ANZCO 1 to 3, they can be considered mid-skilled if they're earning above $19.97 an hour. If they're earning below $19.97 per hour, then they'll be considered low-skilled. If they're in that low-skilled band, then they will need to apply for visas in their own right. So if, for example, the partner is also able to qualify for an essential skills visa, then that's fine. The exception to that is obviously for those families that are already here.
And another question, probably quite relevant to the audience in Wellington. What happens with a potential change of government in September?
That's a good one for policy.
So we're apolitical public servants. So these are changes that are being implemented on Monday. The changes have been made by the current government. So irrespective of what happens on the 23rd of September, the new government will have the right to decide what the policy settings are. So I'm not going to speculate on what a new government may be or choose to ask us to work on.
Any other questions? Anything from...
Oh yeah, so many. Will the new salary stop moving. Will the new salary threshold... we got our accreditation renewed in May 2017. Will we need to renew it again in May 2018, or will it stretch to 2019?
No, the answer is yes, they will need to renew in 2018.
Yes. But then...
It will go 2 years.
It'll go for 2 years more.
More about salaries?
At present, highly skilled person would be considered low skilled if they're required to work, e.g. 80 hours per week for 1 week a year, given maximum hour calculation requirement. So again...
Right. So this is about, so I think what this question is, you know, as I've said, we're looking at a hourly rate, and obviously if somebody's working a lot of hours, that basically dilutes their hourly rate down to a lower rate. There will be cases, and we've all been in them, no doubt, and we certainly have over the past 2 months, where people just have to work some more hours because there's a deadline, because somebody's away sick, you know, that kind of thing. So we're not really interested in kind of going after employers when that sort of situation arises. It's more about what kind of hours are normal for that work. So if somebody's telling us, hey, the normal number of hours is going to be 40, it might be more from time to time, then that's fine. We'll use 40, provided that is realistic for that job. If they're saying it's 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week, and it's some job which, in our experience, might usually be a 60-hour-a-week job, and that salary level is right on the threshold, and so we're starting to think maybe it's been lowered down to 30 hours just to get them over that hourly rate threshold. That's when immigration will be asking some more questions. But in the situation where somebody just ends up working some more hours because of just the normal course of unexpected things happening, you know, from time to time, as long as it's not the usual thing, then that's okay.
And Kathy, when they go to renew, so say they want to hire the person for another year, would you be looking to see the pay records from the previous year?
Yeah, we would.
So if there was any...
Yeah, if there's anything, odd going on, we would see
you would pick
there.
it up at that point. Yeah.
Got another question here from online. Ismail wants to confirm, will the new salary thresholds apply to EOIs approved before 28 August? He thinks the answer is no, but wants to be sure. Okay,
so people who have been invited to apply previously. So somebody who's got an invitation to apply for SMC, no, that it won't apply to them. The policy that applies to them is locked in at the time that they were invited to apply.
We'll take a couple more, I think.
Any more from the floor?
I don't think there's any more from the...
Sure.
In regards to the sector specific, you've stated that it's going to be by December 2017. Is that implementation and final decisions made, or is that consultation process? Or when you say December 2017, at what stage is that at?
Yeah.
It's not clear.
Sure. So the question was the sector-specific solutions or responses. What stage will they be at by the December 2017 deadline, which we've set ourselves? So we've got a very clear expectation from the government that we'll report to them. So we will have done the consultation process. We're still in the planning for how we'll engage with those sectors at the moment. We've started to reach out to the sectors, but we're at the early stages of engagement. So to identify the information that we'd like to get from the sectors and to talk about the issues that they're facing. So we've got a lot from the consultation already. We intend to undertake that consultation and report back to ministers so they can make decisions by the end of the year. So the implementation, it will depend on what the solution is. So if it's a straightforward solution that can be implemented, Kathy is asking me not to make her work like crazy over the Christmas holiday period. So you know, I mean, it will depend what we need to do to instructions, dependent on what the solution is to when we could implement those solutions. I would expect early 2018, so there will be probably a couple of months to work through the instructions process.
Any more questions from the floor? I've got a great one from online. Will the processing time of visa applications improve with new policies?
Kathy.
Own it.
Don't look at me. I'm not in visa services. I don't expect that they will change.
What we are doing is we're aware of the processing time issues, and so there is conversations going on about how they can be improved.
Is there any chance family points are coming back onto the point list?
So the points have been set for now. So there was a question, will family points come back on? We're not intending to review the points list in the short term.
And this is a great one, I think, for people who've got lots of different sites. Can an employer employ someone to work at more than one site in their group? Currently, we're being restricted to only employing them at one site.
Yeah, so the reason for that is to do with the labour market test. So the visa will specify where the person can work, and the reason is that's where we've said it's been established. Okay, there are no New Zealanders in that place. Whereas obviously if they go work somewhere else, it might be somewhere that there are New Zealanders available. So the labour market test is what makes it a region-specific thing. Yeah.
I think that's about it, unless you've got a juicy one for us, Louise.
Well, they're all good.
Just one more, right?
One more. If a lower skilled employee is bound within their job description for the duration of the approved visa, perhaps 1 year, maximum of 3 years, how are we to upskill this individual to become medium skilled?
Do you want me to take that? Yeah, that's fine. So the question, if somebody's a lower skilled visa holder, essential skills, and they're bound to a job, so they've got the job specified as a part of the visa, how can an employer upskill them? So there's no restriction on that, so in a specific sense, and we do expect to see some upskilling occurring. So I think an employer needs to think about how they balance the job that the person is there for, the acquisition of skills that you can get through that work experience, and sort of the training opportunities that are a part of that job. So we would expect to see a balance. I mean, there might be, if it's a formal upskilling, somebody might be doing that outside of work, so an employer might support them. So it would be good to see that employer supporting New Zealanders through the same process. So, and then when the migrant comes to apply for the essential skills visa again, we will look at the migrant on the face of the conditions, the skills they have at the point of the next application. So.
I think that's it for us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'm just going to, just before we wind up, I thought I'd just say that we're going to hang around. So if anyone wants to come and talk to us specifically, there's a group, there'll be a lot of us hanging around. I just thought I'd introduce a couple of other people. If you've got issues regarding retention or settlement, we've got Helen Stevens, who's the local specialist in that area at the back of the room there. That's Helen. And also, if you're looking for some advice and information around how to attract migrants, we've got our marketing team who have got lots of ideas and tools and products. So we've got Nick, Kirsten, Louise, Natalie and Johnny. So there's lots in the room that you can talk to, all down the back of the room. And of course, Shane and Kathy will be here to answer any of the potentially more curly questions. Thank you for coming. I hope it was of value. You will get a set of these slides and a survey. We ask you to fill out the survey, just give us some feedback, and you'll get a deck of the slides if you've registered. And thank you to our live streaming audience for dialing in, I guess. Thank you.
To all of our